Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our dear participants. We are really very grateful for you joining this webinar on soil governance. We want to wish you a very good start of the year, of course, and especially to start with a webinar that is devoted to a topic that it is very important for all of us who take care about soil health. Today we have a very dense agenda with a number of very important speakers who will be providing us with different views and angles regarding soil governance. So we are really grateful to all our panelists, and we hope the event will be, let's say, successful for our more than 400 participants that we have so far. We got more than 1,500 participants registered, so I'm sure more will be joining now. We will have an introductory part that will be provided by the two eminent speakers, and then we will have a series of presentations to address the soil governance from different elements and perspectives. And we will finalize it with the launch of a tool that we would like to share with all of you regarding soil legislation. In between, we will have a number of polls in order to make this an interactive webinar. And of course, if time allows, we would like to also answer some of the questions that you will be posting in the chat. I would like to also remind you that after the webinar, in some days, we will send you a report, including answers to all the questions that you will be posting in the chat, together with also a follow-up action. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Eduardo Mansur, who's the Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment in FAO, in order to provide opening remarks. Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Ronald. Many thanks to the Global Soil Partnership for the invitation to speak on behalf of FAO, the host of the Global Partnership, to welcome you all to this webinar. I especially recognize and welcome the presence of Dr. Falkenberg, the representative, the permanent representative of the European Union in Rome-based agencies. It's an honor to have you, Madam, with us. Thank you very much. And it's an honor to have all of the 460 participants. I'm always impressed when the GSP organize webinars, because the number of participants reveal the importance that people give, the colleagues give to the topic from all over the world. So let me, first of all, this is the first webinar I'm participating in 2013. Let me wish you a very healthy, happy new year. On behalf of my colleagues in FAO, we are delighted to have you here with us for this first event of the Global Soil Partnership in 2021. We expected 2020 to be the super year for nature. And I think all of us have some frustrations regarding 2020 because of the pandemic, but we have to take it positively, in the sense that no matter how dramatic or how tragic a year like the one that has so many deaths related to the pandemic and so many disruptions in our economy as 2020 have been, we have always to look at the opportunities that the challenge put in front of us, and the things that we learn. And one of the things that we learned was to be more effective in the use of tools like webinars, of virtual meetings. And this has an impact on an area that we are all interested to make. I'm the director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. Everything that means reducing the footprint, our carbon footprint, or our environmental impact is positive, no matter the difficulties that we are facing in 2020. The fact that we can be here together virtually talking to each other is a plus. And we are here gathering today to discuss one topic that has not been much debated yet, which is soil governance. Governance in general is a very important topic, and we pay very good attention to it in FAO. especially since the issuing by the Committee on Food Security of the voluntary guidelines for the governance of land, forestry, and fisheries. And that was 6 years ago. It had a huge impact on the work that we do in terms of tenure and in terms of governance in general, with all the aspects related to the institutional capacity, to the policies, to the legislation. But one thing that we didn't develop yet was a package of information, of knowledge, of support to the member countries related to the soil governance. It's easy to understand the land governance, the natural resource governance, but soil is under our feet, right? It's the vertical part, and it's normally ignored. And no matter how much we know in terms of science, in terms of knowledge that we have from the science-based, from the practice, from the farmers that use soil on their daily basis, because 95% of the food that we eat come one way or the other from the soils, we have done not sufficiently, definitely, on addressing soil governance. And that's why this webinar is so important, because soils play a key role in addressing global change, global challenge. Food security is one of them, poverty reduction, biodiversity loss, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, the whole package of discussion that we are doing all over the world. And let me again recognize the EU leadership on this with the Green Deal that's promoting a new thinking on the way that we are going to recover from the pandemic, not only on the practices, but also on the policies, on the investments that they'll bring to it. I think it's very timely that we have to discuss soil governance, because soil is an essential component for the agricultural sector, is a key provider of ecosystem services. It's not that we don't have soil governance, but we have it fragmented. There are certain countries have it much stronger than the others. We have it in laws, in rules, and strategies. They have an attempt, this fragmented set, have an attempt to preserve or guarantee different soil functions, soil services, but being it splittered in different legal areas, in agriculture, in environment, in forestry, in urban planning, in mining, and at different administrative levels, depending on the competences at the national level, results in different interests, in different perceptions. And at the end, the soil management, the sustainable soil management, as FAO is promoting through the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management that have been approved in the International Year on Soils in 2015, or immediately thereafter, after the global chart, the review of the global chart on soils, have not gained the momentum that we are looking for it. So we need to work more on this soil governance as a whole, to avoid mixed package of rules, of norms, of policies, and sometimes conflicting ones. So soils are cross-cutting by nature, but this has also a disadvantage, because sometimes they are neglected with the expectation that they are covered in broader regulations. This is not the case. We need to look at the regulations, that the governance systems, the institutions that will improve soil conservation, sustainable management, sustainable use, and restoration. We are starting 2021 with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. It's 2021-2030. This UN Decade is not a parallel initiative, is an accelerator of improving restoration. All the activities that we'll be able to promote for better governance of soils, that will promote its sustainable use, conservation, avoid pollution. The soil are this sponge in the planet that absorbs, together with the oceans, all the effects of ecosystem use, ecosystem management, and the contaminants that are released on the environment. We have to look at it not only from the technical, let's say, scientific point of view, but how we will be able to influence policy and decision making in a comprehensive way. In other words, as we didn't manage to make 2020 the super year of nature, we have to make 2021 the recall of the super year of nature. Soil governance shapes the way that soil will be used, would soil be protected. And we have to look at it in long term, because the impacts that cause on soil, say, with erosion, pollution, degradation, compaction, salinity, they have impact on many, many generations to come. So our responsibility is very big. The world population is increasing. There is no need for us to continue exploiting our natural resource in an unsustainable fashion to produce the food we need. We don't have to expand the land that are being used for agriculture. We don't have to cut one more tree to produce the food we need. Globally speaking, the area that's being cultivated need to be better managed, basically that. We are going to have in this seminar, the program is fantastic. Thank you very much for the Global Soil Partnership, Ronald and colleagues, to put, and the IPBS, to put the program that we have, because we have here experts that will indicate to us how to better understand soil governance from legal, from policy points of view, from investment point of view. And the three panelists that we have today here have extensive experience in this field. So they are going to guide us through it. FAO and GSP will highlight the efforts that we are promoting on soil governance, especially to provide information for decision-making, for informed decision-making. We want to promote the implementation of the voluntary guidelines on sustainable soil management. And at the forefront, I would like to thank all the donors that are contributing to this effort. The European Union has been consistently supporting the European Commission as a consistent support to all our efforts in terms of sustainable soil management. So thank you very much for the European Commission and for all other partners that have been spearheading this important activity that we are developing through the Global Soil Partnership. So we hope the webinar will be interactive, will be frank. The questions and answers, as Natalia put in the chat, time is short, so please place it. We are going to respond now or by writing. And shortly after the webinar, we are going to have a report that will hopefully guide our actions towards this important new area that we are developing here. In FAO, we have, with the support of our legal office, the establishment of we call the SoiLEX, where information is accumulated. We want to have there the SoiLEX as well. Ronald's going to explain to us a little bit more what this database will be providing for us. Our intention is to make you, all of you, the 570, almost 567, 68, grows by the minute, participants here, convinced that working on soil governance at your end, with the actions that you can do in your universe, will contribute for a better world, for a more sustainable world, for the achievement of these sustainable development goals that are related to nature, to the foundation of what we need. The natural resources are the basis that we need for the social and economic development of the planet. I finish it here, my welcoming remarks on behalf of FAO. Thank you very much for the colleagues of the GSP for the opportunity. I will accompany you until 3:30, then I will have to leave, but I'll certainly learn from what the seminar, the webinar will deliberate. Thank you very much. Ronald, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for this very comprehensive setting of the meeting and of the webinar per se, and for connecting the different dots, because of course soils cannot be isolated, and you put it very nicely in the framework of the voluntary guidelines for tenure of land, forestry, and fisheries, because soils is connected to all of them. And definitely you mentioned very well that this year we are trying to promote nature, and nature deserves actions that are oriented towards concrete results. And for that, you need frameworks, you need governance, and we will be learning what we mean exactly by soil governance. We will be also listening to our speakers, who will share with us the different attempts globally, regionally, and nationally for having soil governance as a very important topic. Now, I'm very honored to invite Her Excellency Alexandra Valkerburg, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the European Union to the Rome-based agencies, including FAO. She will provide us also her perspective from the European Union. And as you are perhaps aware, the European Union is one region that has been always considering soil governance in a regional perspective, with the Soil Protection Directive, and now with this very ambitious and timely European Green Deal. So we will be very glad to listen to Her Excellency. Please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Vargas, Mr. Mansour, distinguished participants, good afternoon. And thank you for the invitation. And let me start by wishing you all a very happy new year still. I remember it's only a month ago that we celebrated World Soil Day, and that the EU launched the EU Soil Observatory. As we all know, healthy soils means healthy life in a healthy planet. And we have to take care all together to maintain healthy soils and restore them when they have been degraded by unsustainable human activities. Healthy soils, are essential because not only can they provide nutritious and safe food and feed, medicinal plants, fiber and timber, they also provide humanity with a whole range of invaluable services, from filtering and retaining water to cycling nutrients, from absorbing and retaining carbon to mitigating climate extremes, to just mention a few. Soils properly managed and governed can be the solution at the same time for food security today and tomorrow, for climate change mitigation and adaptation, for sustained biodiversity, and for a thriving landscape. You already mentioned the European Green Deal that indeed we launched as a green development strategy with a very high environmental ambition. Within this Green Deal, the European Commission has adopted initiatives among others for addressing climate change, restoring biodiversity, and implementing sustainable food systems. And indeed, land and soils play a crucial role in this Green Deal. We have set ourselves the ambitious challenge of ensuring that by 2030, 75% of the EU soils are healthy for food, people, nature, and climate. The biodiversity strategy of 2030, also part of the Green Deal framework, furthermore emphasized the need to improve the monitoring of soil quality, pollution, and biodiversity, because as we all know, measuring is knowing. A better understanding of the condition and pressures that are put on the soil ecosystem indicates if we are on the right track and what progress we are making towards achieving our policy targets. Last December, we launched the EU Soil Observatory to guide and steer EU soil policy. And the European Commission committed to present a new EU soil strategy this year to protect soil fertility, to reduce soil erosion, to increase soil organic matter, to promote sustainable soil management practices, and to restore degraded soils. This new strategy will provide the EU with an overarching framework for an integrated and coherent soil governance at EU level. We aim to address soil issues in a comprehensive way in order to fulfill EU and international commitments on land degradation neutrality. We often hear saying soils do not move, but the effects of soil degradation do not know borders. That's why a global governance is relevant and important, because our planet is one and all elements of nature are interconnected. We have to recreate this interconnection in our governance. When we look at how the world is organized to govern together and protect the environment, it's striking that we have no convention specifically on soil. However, soil is, of course, an underlying key element to the three Rio Conventions on climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. But thankfully, we have the Global Soil Partnership led by the FAO. as an essential voluntary partnership with very large world coverage and very active globally to promote sustainable soil management. There's a high level of collaboration between the EU and the Global Soil Partnership, and there's strong EU appreciation for the multiple initiatives of the partnership secretariat under the FAO for World Soil Governance. And we are really happy to support the Global Soil Partnership, both financially and with expertise. And I think this webinar is once again a show of that we wish to continue learning from each other on how best to govern soil, land, biodiversity, climate, and food systems all together. And I hope that the Green Deal and its future soil strategy can provide inspiration and good examples for this, and that we can continue with our interchanging of knowledge and experience. And I think today's launch of the global database on national legislation on soil, SoiLEX, will surely facilitate access to existing legal instruments and bridge the gap between soil stakeholders. It will also better enable us to exchange experiences in soil governance between countries and regions. And so to end, my congratulations to all who were involved in setting up this database. And I really hope that indeed this webinar is an important step. I wish you all a successful webinar, and we're very interested in the outcomes and the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency, for your inspiring opening remarks, and be sure that we always learn and get inspired by all the actions that the region and the European Union are making. And definitely, we have been working together in order to try to see how to fill the gap that was existing in terms of global soil governance. Indeed, you mentioned a convention, and in the absence of it, we have tried to have a soft mechanism to try to promote sustainable soil management in the meantime that we get something more formal. But we cannot wait, and we should be working and trying to promote sustainable soil management because, you know, as you say it clearly, this is one planet and time is moving very fast. So we need to take actions. And we want to thank very much the European Union for all their support, guidance, inspiration, but also by doing things by example. We hope other regions will be doing something similar in order to protect our soils and nature. Thank you very much again. And now I would like to proceed with some keynote presentations that will be setting up the soil governance issues. First, I would like to invite a colleague, but also a friend. He is Dr. Harald Gliński, a lawyer with more than 20 years of experience in German, European, and international soil protection law. And Harald is very well known because he has been the editor-in-chief of the International Yearbook of Soil Law and Policy since 2016. Therefore, I'm sure he has a lot to share with all of us, not only from theory, but from a lot of practices.
I lost you.
Rona, we can't hear you. No, not yet. So while you recover your microphone, maybe Isabella, you can take over. Ronald Distrap. Just welcoming our next speaker. Ronald, your mic's not working, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. I would suggest Harald to start his presentation.
Yes, please.
Share the screen.
Of course, I can do that.
Harald, go ahead. Ronald will fix.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can be heard.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Then I start. First of all, thanks to Ronald for the kind introduction, and hello to Ms. Falkenburg and Ms. Mansour, Eduardo, all the participants. And I would like to congratulate the FAO team for organizing this very important and interesting event. And thanks for inviting me as a speaker. My topic today is, with the first slide would be nice. Yeah. So you see the title of my topic, Good Governance for Sustainable Soil Management, How to Do It. But before we can address the how, we need to talk about the reasons why we need good, effective soil governance. And the answer to this is very simple and clear, and Eduardo and Ms. Falkenburg nicely expressed it already. I can say it with my words: without healthy soils, there will be no sustainable development of our society. So soils are very crucial. Soils provide a lot of important ecological and social services. First of all, they are an important sequester of carbon and thus very important for climate mitigation and adaptation measures. They're important and relevant for biodiversity, as they provide the crucial habitats for plants and animals. Moreover, they protect as a buffer groundwater and other aquatic systems. In addition, soils are also important from an economic point of view, as they are required for the production of food and renewable energy plants. And finally, which is also important, soils carry somewhat our culture and our history. At the same time, soils are increasingly degraded. This was also already expressed, leading to a loss of the ability of a lot of people, in particular in developing countries, to sustain, to displacement and migration within a country and beyond borders, to accelerated climate change, loss of biodiversity as well. And this is also not very nice, to potentially political and even military tensions. So this is could be the consequences of land degradation. Next slide, please. But there's a good thing. Next slide. There's a good thing that we could currently perceive a very high level and never seen level of awareness for soil protection aspects among scientists, policymakers, and of the general public. The starting point was in 2012, when state leaders committed themselves to land degradation neutral world and a Rio +20 outcome document, The Future We Want. 3 years later, this objective was included as one target of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which was then approved by the UN General Assembly in September 2015. And since 2018, we have seen several reports and studies which again and again have underscored the importance of soils, in particular their ecological and social services. You see some of these reports and studies listed here. The effects of ongoing climate change and the obvious biodiversity crisis have led to this new level of awareness. And last year, the COVID-19 pandemic had clearly emphasized that humankind depend on resilient system inter alia for food security and for the welfare of small-scale farmers. Next slide, please. So now, why now do we need soil governance? The purpose of soil governance is to achieve sustainable management of soils. Soil governance not only includes legal provisions, but also addresses the institutional and financial endowment. Soil governance could be found on international level, such as the UNCCD, CBD, or UNFCCC. Soil governance at regional level means regulations by the European Union or by the African Union, for example. My colleague Irene Heuser will tackle international and regional soil governance in her talk. Next to these levels, the national level is very important, as sustainable soil management could only be implemented on the ground. National legislation needs to ensure that all human activities which could have detrimental effects on healthy soils are effectively regulated. Next slide. In the following, I will provide 9 recommendations how to do good soil governance at the national level. My first recommendation. Good governance depends on data and information. For that, soil scientific institutions need to be established in the various countries. These entities should gather, evaluate, and assess soil data and information and distribute it to policymakers and other users in the private sector, for example, farmers. Second recommendation. The general objective of national soil governance should be the maintenance and enhancements of ecological and social services of soils. Soils need to be recognized as a natural resource from a legal perspective. This is extremely important as land has often been regarded as pure private asset, in particular in the legislation of many developing countries. In order to implement and enforce this objective, this is a legal question, a permission control system for land and soil use change is required. This could and should include a compensation obligation to offset all negative effects on healthy soils. Thereby, the objective of land degradation neutrality could be implemented at national level. Next slide, please. Manso already said it. Sustainable soil management is a cross-cutting issue, as almost all human activities and actions affect soils. There are many and various drivers of soil degradation. To name some of them: agriculture, urbanization, industrial facilities, mining and infrastructure projects, such as streets, railways, or airports, poverty, and demographic growth. All these activities could affect soils. And for all these activities, specific legislation exists normally. That the consequence is that all sectoral provisions must entail, in future, hopefully, appropriate requirements to maintain and to enhance the ecological and social services of soils. Recommendation 4. Many research studies have shown that the success of soil governance in practice very much depend on legally binding standards for the various soil threats: inter alia compaction, erosion, soil sealing, loss of carbon, loss of biodiversity, salinization, water scarcity, and flooding. For all these soil threats and aspects, legally binding standards are required to have first a defined and agreed level of ambition and to be able to instruct authorities in charge of implementation. Fortunately, the FAO has organized several international workshops on different soil threats in the last years, for example, on pollution, erosion, and biodiversity. The outcome documents of these workshops have been very instructive. However, the FAO recommendations need to be transposed and adjusted to the national conditions, and finally need to be put into legal force. Next slide, please. My recommendation number 5. Access to land is extremely important. Lack of legal clarity on this issue is a very strong impediment to sustainable soil management. We made this experience often in developing countries. Clarification of tenure rights could support poverty eradication, control of foreign investor, and could lead thereby to more justice for all. Recommendation number 6. It is fundamentally important to establish effective institutional settings and arrangements for the implementation and enforcement. Experience show that clever provisions are only ink on a paper without an effective implementation and enforcement, and sometimes necessary sanctions. Therefore, the roles and responsibilities of the various ministries and competent authorities need to be clearly determined by legal provisions. Based on my experience in Germany, Africa, and India, I would like to highlight that the decision-making process to define and to determine these competences of the various entities is comparably complicated, demanding, and time-consuming as the drafting of good substantial provisions. So my recommendation is, please do not underestimate this challenge. Recommendation number 7. Furthermore, we need to ensure an effective involvement of the whole society, and in particular of civil society organizations. Access to environmental information, public participation, and access to justice are crucial mechanisms in this regard. The involvement of societal actors is important to control public authorities and foreign investors and to prevent all kinds of corruptions. Next and last slide, please. It's good to say that it is a very good time to convince policymakers at the moment of the need of good soil governance. Public awareness is currently extremely high. I have been working on this issue for 20 years and I can say that. For example, all participants of workshops in Zambia, Ghana, and Kenya in 2019, which I met, stressed the importance of soils. At the same time, many projects are underway these days to draft better soil governance in Germany, in India, in Iran, and in Africa, for example. The Pan-African Parliament is strongly pushing for a model law for sustainable soil management for whole Africa. Furthermore, many doctoral theses currently addresses aspects of soil governance on the various levels. Recommendation 9. So this is an interesting one. Please do not reinvent the wheel. A lot of work has already been conducted, which could be consulted and used. The IUCN Specialist Group, Irene is member to this group, has acted as a pioneer and has submitted several interesting proposals. In addition, 4 volumes of the International Yearbook of Soil Law and Policy, each more than 400 pages, have been published. In addition, my agency intends to organize an international workshop on best practices of national soil governance in 2022 in cooperation with many other international organizations. And today, we celebrate the launch of the SoiLEX of FAO. I may say, unfortunately, not in person, not with glasses of wine in our hands, but still with the same enthusiasm that this will be an additional brick, next brick, which is needed to build up a functioning house of effective soil governance. Before I end, I would like to congratulate the FAO colleagues, the GSP colleagues of work, also, of course, to this important work. And I hope that we could cooperate as allies for our common project and objective to protect our soils, the thin but lively and dynamic skin of Mother Earth. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Dear Harald, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I lost the connection before and I couldn't introduce you properly. Well, thank you for the nice presentation and the recommendations. After all your experience, more than 20 years working in the legislation and governance of soils, not only in Germany. So really very insightful. There are some questions. So I will bring the questions after all the presentations so that we have a sort of panel discussion. Okay, so we will have around 2 questions for you. Thank you very much again. With that global perspective that you also gave, I would like to invite all participants to respond to a poll. So the poll will be launched now, and we would like to ask you if you consider that at global level, there is still a gap in terms of soil governance. We have more than 600 participants. So, well, if we reach around 65, 70% of answers, then we can see what people think. Why we are asking this question? Because basically, as you said, well, there are 3 UN conventions with different topics, but soil is transversal to all this. but there is no specific convention addressing the issue of soils. And many people maybe will ask why. I'm sure Irene will help us to answer that question. But it will be nice to understand from people what they think. So, well, we reach around 67%, and the majority says that there is still a gap in terms of global soil governance, which is not surprising because, as I said, and Harald already presented, there is no specific convention which brings the soil topic at a more official and binding level. Thanks to all for their answers. Now, I'm very pleased to invite a friend, a colleague, who's Dr. Irene Heuser from the IUCN. She is a very well-known person who has been working very hard in terms of soil governance, and she has been chairing this group on soils, desertification, and sustainable agriculture. And there has been many attempts and proposals in order to fill the gap in terms of global soil governance. So I'm sure she will share with all of us all the summary of these experiences. So Irene, you have the floor, and thank you very much again for being with us today.
I hope you can hear me now. Is it?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot. So thanks for inviting me, and also thank you very much for these interesting presentations we have already heard. I'm really happy also that more than 600 people already joined us now here in this event. It's a bit new to my colleagues and me from the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and our specialist groups on soils desertification and sustainable agriculture, because normally it's not so much, there's not so much interest, and this might be one of the advantages of digitalization. And it also seems like many people today share a feeling or a sense of the time we are living in, whether they work in science governments or companies or other communities. We live in a time of disruption and upheaval, and I can really sense this wind of change, not only due to the global pandemic, but in many areas of life. The COVID-19 pandemic has radically changed the global perspectives for 2021, not to mention in our own personal lives. The crisis, just a moment, I can't really change the site. Maybe Isabel, you can help me. So, no, it works. Okay, so the starting point is where we are today, and I think that our global perspectives have really changed, and yeah, we have already, or the crisis has not only shown the limits of our health system, but more general revealed the global interdependence between the society and nature, and directed the focus on the bigger challenges of our time, and especially global warming and biodiversity loss, but also the land and soil degradation. And that's why we are all virtually here. This moment is a unique opportunity, or as President Macron recently said, more drastically, an electric shock and a moment of awakening. And I hope he is right, that it's a moment of awakening, a moment to rethink our current business model, social, ecological standards, and our common way of living. So globalization has left a trace which reveals the vulnerability of our social, economic, and ecological systems. But these connections were clear long before Corona. So how could we ignore them for so long? And this is one of the main questions in the context of soil protection law. Why didn't we realize the importance and necessity of protection of our soils? We all know soil is a natural resource. It plays a vital role in the Earth's ecosystem, fulfills a multitude of ecological, economic, social functions. Just some headlines: biodiversity, supplying the world food, regulating the climate. We all know that. So soil is a common interest, or some say a common heritage or concern of mankind. And we already know a lot about these facts, also through all these recent reports of IPCC, IPBES, FAO as well, of course. And we all know soil is essentially, or on human time scales, essentially non-renewable. And we know how many people are affected from land degradation. 1 billion people globally, 74% of the poor are directly affected by land degradation. We are losing around 12 million hectares of land each year. And there's a lot more to say in this context from a scientific point of view. But I would just like to leave it at that point. We have already talked about the soil threats. So very briefly, I don't want to limit the discussion at the beginning. So I have a broad understanding of the soil threats. And therefore, I also use a broad definition. And it's a common perception from the point of international and national law that soils are regarded as the poor cousin compared to other environmental media, in particular water and atmosphere. And I hope, of course, that this perception is slowly changing. We have already mentioned the International Year of Soils, following the SDGs in the year 2015, the World Soil Day, etc. The revised World Soil Charter expresses this and also advocates for legislation at all levels. I just take this example because you might be familiar with this FAO document. It's the advocation for legislation at all levels. This is our starting point on international, regional, and national level, as Harald has already said. He has already talked about the national level, where specific soil acts or the inclusion of soil protection provisions into a general environmental protection act, for example, can serve as templates or as model acts for other countries. Therefore, I was very happy to hear about the activities of the FAO GSP and the new tool SoiLEX, which will offer a kind of tailor-made soil protection instruments for each country, or at least this is my expectation when it's really ready. And I'm really looking forward to Hugo's presentation about the details of this new platform. But first of all, my congratulations for this important step. Concerning the regional level, there are a number of binding regional instruments for soil protection, have specific articles for soil as well as other articles that can support the objective of sustainable use of soil. I just want to mention the ASEAN Agreement on the Protection of Nature and Natural Resources for the South Pacific region, which was already adopted in 1985 and includes an article on soil. I haven't had a look at the brand new trade agreement and its standards there. This might be very interesting also. Another example is the revised African Convention for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources of 2003, which includes also fundamental rules for the conservation and sustainable management of land resources. And here the new African Continental Free Trade Area in this context is also very interesting. And yeah, maybe we can also hear something about that from our colleagues. And as a last example for the regional level, the protocol on the implementation of the Convention concerning the protection of the Alps and its soil protection protocol, which is also very interesting, one of the only binding legal instruments in the world specifically for the protection of soils. Concerning the international level, there are binding and non-binding instruments. This is just to give you an overview. There's a huge variety of non-binding instruments, and they can be regarded as benchmarks in order to measure how far we have already progressed. They often act as essential steps in the consensus building for later treaties. And you can see this in the slide that, yeah, there are quite very differing or very different steps included in these soft law instruments. The Global Soil Partnership is also, of course, one of these, I have to mention it in this whole context, was established in 2011. I might, Hugo might say much more about that, so I will stop here, but I just think that this is again intended also, this slide, to show you the development in this field of regional legislation in a non-binding form. You can see also I mixed in some political statements as well, like the Africa Consensus Statement, which led to the zero net land degradation or land degradation neutrality later on. Consensus, which we have now as a global ambition as SDG target 15.3. You might all know about that. Yes, SDG 15 and of course all the other SDGs came into effect in January 2016 and will guide the decisions we take over the next 10 years. All SDGs and targets are legally non-binding, but they have a great political influence. Each government has to set its own national targets guided by the global level of ambition, but taking into account national circumstances. And the SDGs are intended to have a direct influence on the practice of states. Concerning binding instruments on international level, I could really say much more about all the different instruments, but I just want to give you a good overview, and maybe we can go deeper into some of these aspects in the discussion. All three Rio conventions, this has already been mentioned before, they are binding instruments. They might influence the use of soils, although there is no specific, no comprehensive soil or land protection convention yet. Investigation of our specialist group of IUCN WSL and my colleagues, Professor Ian Hannon and Professor Ben Bohr, have spent so much time with this analysis. So this investigation into provisions within these legislative instruments indicate that all three Rio conventions are insufficient as a framework to meet the objective of sustainable use and protection of soils. They do not include anywhere near a sufficient range of elements. Let's switch to this. There is no real sufficient range of elements needed to protect and manage soils in a sustainable way, because these policies or these acts often have other aims and other scopes of action. Therefore, there is an urgency to improve the synergies between UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD, and also to provide benefits for the soils. International environmental law fails to take into consideration all of the implications of soil and tends to disregard it as such, I would even say, more drastically. Concerning future, or maybe let me just add one more aspect concerning from an international soil governance point of view. What we really need is maybe a single convention for the protection and sustainable use of soils, but this might still not be realistic at the moment. But maybe also a Paris-style agreement with natural determined contributions like in the Paris Agreement. This might also help to put focus on this process, or to be, to have an exchange of policies, an exchange of legal options, and this might very much help to be more ambitious on international level, to come to a real change and a step forward. If we think about future approaches, this is the really interesting part, I think. We will have to differentiate between concrete action, which is to be taken at the most appropriate level, and we need action, of course, on all levels. And we will have to deal with certain questions like, do we need targets for each threat? Is it better at a national or at a regional level? What about the effectiveness of a target setting in general for soils? Do we need obligations? Do they need to be, is it enough to have a voluntary process like in the NDC process of the Paris Agreement? What about the development of guidelines? I think all these questions count, and soil protection and sustainable use of soil is a subject matter where international cooperation is very much needed. It's a global problem which cannot be handled only by pure national approaches. And the main questions are, how do we raise awareness? And I still have this good example in mind, talking about hindrances, obstacles for legislation. I would like to mention the example of the draft EU Soil Framework Directive of 2006, which failed in the Council after long years of discussions. And then, it was the example of the draft. The proposal was drawn back from the Commission. Many member states, also Germany, Austria, France, the Netherlands, just to mention some, they blocked the adoption of the Soil Framework Directive. Maybe some of you still remember this very long process. And these were the arguments of opponents of the EU Soil Framework Directive. And this is also to be seen in the context of the Green Deal, because as we have heard from Her Excellency, the soil protection or an update of the soil thematic strategy is part of the Green Deal. It hinders agriculture. These were the arguments, not my point of view, but arguments in this context. And it's also relevant on all other levels. And I will quickly want to mention these these prejudices in a way, that soil legislative act will hinder agriculture, will endanger economic development, will be a bureaucratic monster, and so on. I don't think this is true, but these are the reasons for legal neglect. Other examples or other arguments were that we have a property regime, or also, this is a bit different, but also relevant for tenure rights, which hinder legislation in this field. Then soils are not regarded as a common heritage because of this property regime. Another argument is that we don't relate to the soil anymore because of this. Of course, simple ones like dirt. There's a film about the dirt. I don't know whether you know this one, 10 years old. Other examples or other arguments concerning the lack of information, or the lack, or that it's difficult to perceive or to see the soil damage. To be very quick, arguments in favor of soil legislation can, of course, be that this connection to climate change, soils fulfill an important role in this context, and we all know that, and I think I don't need to go into details, but this might help also for argumentation also on national and international level. And of course also this aspect, this huge topic of food security. If in 2050 we have to feed around 10 billion people on our planet, we will need healthy soils and have to avoid land scarcity, land grabbing, and all of this. So this is also an important argument. And with this, I would like to come to my last slide. I think that our societal task would be to treat new paths towards the preservation of ecological, stable and healthy soils, and to develop a new ecologically based soil protection ethic. We can also say this with the words of Aldo Leopold, an American forester and wildlife ecologist living in the beginning of the 20th century, who said that land as a community is the basic concept of ecology, but that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. And therefore, I really think that we need this ecology-based new ethic, and the legal framework to be created will underpin and stabilize this development. And therefore 2021 is the year to step up in this sense and to join our efforts. I thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you very much. It was really very insightful, and I'm sure people are very interested. They post many questions, so I'm trying to see which one to ask, but I will again bring all the questions together into a panel discussion. Definitely, this is a very important topic, and people are wondering because, well, at global level, they say there are, as you saw, there is no binding mechanism directly related to soils. And of course, awareness raising is fundamental. And I think we all agree with that. And that's why, for instance, in our case, since 2011, when we established the Global Soil Partnership, we invested a lot in awareness raising because although it is sometimes difficult to believe, but not everybody realized the importance of soils. Not only for food security, but now that we have widened the scope for everything. But I believe it has been quite a long time already that we are working on soil awareness. And if we compare 10 years ago with where we are now, I think there is substantial progress and there is quite a lot of interest in terms of soils. And I suppose that's why, for instance, the EU is bringing again the issue of the soil protection directive and see if this time they will make it. But let's see, we don't know. But awareness raising is fundamental. So I will bring the questions exactly after the presentations because there are many, but thank you again. I think you put many things, many elements, and now they will be complemented by our distinguished speaker, Professor Oliver Ruppel, to whom I know, and I know he has a long-term expertise in this topic as well. Professor Ruppel, he is Director and Professor of Law Development and Rule of Law Program in the Stellenbosch University in South Africa. He will present us how strengthening institutions and national capacities, of course, in relation to soil governance. Professor Ruppel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to everyone. Perhaps Isabel can assist me with my slides, and thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation here today. A lot has been said already, and I would like to confine myself to the time given to me and try to complement what has been said. Let me briefly highlight some of my thoughts on soil governance, strengthening institutions and national capacities. COVID-19 has been mentioned. It is a game changer, and I hope that it will stay one. I will not mention more because the previous speakers have elaborated on what I actually wanted to say. But the fact that the Norwegian Nobel Committee decided to award the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize to the World Food Programme for its efforts to combat hunger is a clear reflection to me of the growing significance of food security in our time. The World Food Programme itself has stated that until the day that we have a medical vaccine, food is the best vaccine against chaos, and I agree with that. In order to achieve this goal, however, soil and soil governance is of absolute essence. And I really mentioned soil as an element of international environmental law. True, but soil is much more than that. Soil is human rights law, soil is humanitarian law, soil is world trade law, it's national, regional, and national, and it's really intertwined. As the international soil governance framework remains fragmented, that has been mentioned, and legally soft in parts, more effective governance mechanisms are needed. And while every country must have the right to develop its own agricultural model to feed its own population, respects for the needs of other countries, humankind as a whole, and international law obligations remain key. This requires commitment to overcome substantial barriers at institutional and at conceptual level. I would even call this a conceptual apartheid that has to be overcome, as well as an adequate and corresponding national regulatory framework to protect soils. In that, all countries must accept the responsibilities towards a better soil protection in order to mitigate climate change, conserve biodiversity, and safeguard food security. Therefore, greater efforts are needed to combine economic and climate performance in determining soil as a natural capital and as a valuable asset that needs a price tag, despite the fact that soil is actually priceless. Next slide, please. While tools such as FAO-LEX and ECOLEX compile national legislation and policies and include some legislation on soil protection and degradation prevention, the newly established working group on soil legislation comes just on time to contribute to reviewing and updating the SoiLEX database containing all soil-related legal instruments adopted in each country. And I cordially congratulate the GSP and the FAO for taking such an important decision that is in full support of SDG goal 15.3 that has been mentioned. Next slide. The Paris Agreement has also been mentioned, but I would like to point out that despite the fact that the Paris Agreement is silent on soil, Article 2.1b provides for increasing the ability to adapt to adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food security. The emissions from agriculture, which is also underlined by Article 4 of the Paris Agreement, explicitly include the target to achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases. And while the Paris Agreement fails to explicitly mention soil, it still falls under Article 5.1 that obliges parties to take action to conserve and enhance as appropriate sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases. In this light, soil still has a considerable potential in the context of climate, as they are the world's second largest carbon sinks after the oceans. Next slide, please. Soil also falls under the so-called Coronivia work program at UNFCCC level, but in order to give effect to this and to complement these efforts, institutions, regional and national policies need to beef up soil protection, policy choices and preferences of land-based mitigation options, and interactions with other carbon-related sectors. Next slide, please. Such, for instance, we have closely monitored the developments at the European Union regarding soil policy action based on Article 191 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. And the EU seems to consider seriously improved soil protection as being fundamental in the sense that it wants to adhere to its obligations under the Paris Agreement, under the national determined contributions towards a zero carbon development. In this light, a lot of traction seems to be going on, and we will follow this, of course, in close proximity on the way further. Next slide, please. At the national level, next slide, please. At the national level, soil management should be an integral part of land management in any jurisdiction of the world. In that regard, we have recently completed a research project on the African continent with many African countries on national soil policy, where we compared several national jurisdictions in terms of legislative soil assessment and by means of an analysis of legislative efforts. Harald mentioned the initiative of the Pan-African Parliament that was prompted by our research project. And during such legislative soil reviews, our team of African experts analyzed national constitutions in respect of social, economic, and environmental rights, responsible branches of government for legislating and enforcing those rights. We made an examination of countries' international law obligations. Is it monist? Is it dualist? It's regional, it's bilateral agreements. And legally binding obligations reflect not only in national legislation, but also we have to take strong consideration of regional developments into consideration, including conflicting and ambiguous legislation. Further, we conducted an analysis of existing regulatory, sectoral, and cross-sectoral policy, legal, and institutional frameworks. We tried to identify existing regulatory gaps, bad practices, and we made assessments of institutional and governance frameworks. We have scrutinized the implementation, monitoring efforts, the standardization and enforcement challenges, and we've pinpointed the reasons for that, which is very often linked to cost, lack of capacity, lack of political will, human resources, among others. Moreover, such national legal reviews took into consideration aspects concerning dispute resolution. Which courts are accessible? Which tribunals are available? Administrative environmental tribunals, alternative dispute resolution opportunities, customary courts. And of course, access to justice is important when we talk about access to courts. Do we have legal standing? What are the costs involved? Geographic accessibility, timeliness, availability of counsel, and non-governmental advocacy organizations. So apart from the legislative review, we also took into consideration, and I think that is important, contextual factors that play a role in the assessment of optimal soil protection, which include, among others, demography, distribution of wealth, population density, age, structure, urban-rural split, education, literacy, gender equality, among many others. So in that sense, of course, from an African perspective, unfortunate developments of the past need rectification, like corruption, and of course, how to deal with the resource curse. And in this light, civil engagement is of course key, and that we have done justice to in our various conferences, and we received remarkable feedback from the scientific community, but also from the man from the street, because there is a strong consideration that soil is value. Next slide. Soil can be found in sectoral legislation, as has been mentioned at the beginning, on agriculture, land, environment, water, etc. And as the maintenance and protection of soil is vital in order to allow a continued reliance upon it, it needs to be governed by effective legislation and policy, along with prescribed and practiced enforcement measures. In that light, incentives and deterrents for sustainable land use must ensure that private land use is in line with social and other policy objectives and promotes certain practices, fertilizers, subsidies, etc. Education is key. Education in soil law and policy is missing. The training of judges, prosecutors, lawyers, law students, and others in the subject of soil protection can make a considerable difference. This can lead to an increase of legal personnel that has the expertise and knowledge to ensure that soil protection law is complied with and improved upon, as well as enforced and monitored. Nearly all countries in the world have ministries or national organizations that are responsible for soil-related matters. Yet, both at national and international law level, improving soil governance includes options for enhancing coordination and governance and coherence. And a clearer division of labor between sectors and institutions addressing soil holds significant potential for improving soil governance. The GSP already operates in the context of major threats against limited soil resources in all regions of the world. Consequently, urgent action for countries to take collective and individual action to reverse worrisome trends also relies on global cooperation on soil. It becomes increasingly clear that the element soil is both international and domestic in nature, and therefore it must be pursued in a more complementary manner so that these spheres speak to each other. Lastly, while the work to translate the Paris Agreement and the national NDCs into concrete climate interventions in agriculture is still in progress, many of these policy instruments are becoming more and more relevant to soil and carbon emissions trading, and also for the agreements under the World Trade Organization. Irene mentioned the AFCFTA, the African Free Trade Agreement, which has kicked off only 2 weeks ago, and which now makes the whole African continent with 1.3 billion people a new free trade area. In this context, soil on the continent where most desertification is happening must play a more and more prominent role. On this front, much work still needs to be done, especially when it comes to the non-economic value of soil, because it is no doubt in my mind that an increased competition over land, scarcity of soil, property, and inequality can in turn increase forced cross-border migration movements of those segments of the population which is already most marginalized and vulnerable. Last slide, please. In this light, let's make soil count for everyone. I thank you.
Professor Ruppel, thank you very much for sharing all this experience and very interesting perspective regarding soil governance and legislation. Of course, when looking at the questions at the chat, you know, the audience of this webinar especially is sometimes soil scientists. And it's very good to hear from non-soil scientists, but from lawyers with a lot of experience on how we should be dealing with soil governance, soil legislations. Sometimes technical people are just focused on the technical part, which is of course good, but they miss this very important angle that requires a lot of attention, because without a legal framework, without soil governance at national level, it will be even difficult to have financial resources to do some work on soils or even to try to protect them. So this is really giving a lot of insight in this to all our participants. Now, I would like to invite my colleague, Margaret Vidar. She's a legal officer in FAO, and she will be sharing the work they are doing in terms of how they promote assistance on sustainable soil and land management, but of course from a legal perspective, which is very interesting. Margaret, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo. Thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure to do a little presentation. I'm now going to share my screen. Of course, you will have seen that a lot of what needs to be said has been said. So I only have 10 minutes and I don't need any more. This is, I think, a very useful continuation that I will now provide. Now, FAO has specialized service on development law work, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about that and our methodologies. The main areas of FAO's technical assistance related to sustainable land management and on SoiLEX. So what we do in terms of technical assistance on law is to support FAO members to improve and strengthen their national legislation in different fields related to food and agriculture. But we also support the development on implementation and of international hard and soft law. For instance, the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure, we were very much involved in, and we are using them now very strongly in every land tenure technical assistance that we undertake. We have in the service, we have specialists in different fields, in agriculture law, in fisheries, forestry, water, land tenure management, human rights, environmental law, and we are part of the FAO legal office that work as a technical unit. Now, in our approach, we tend to stress these four factors. That one is, the first is that we are multidisciplinary. That means that we do not normally work by ourselves as lawyers, but we work with the technical colleagues who have the technical expertise in the different fields. And it also helps us to bring in the different disciplines and different sectors. As we have been hearing, you can cut the cake of sustainable land management in so many different ways. And this whole debate about should there be one law or many laws, and how should this be done, this is a technical and technical legal question that really needs to be considered very carefully before deciding on a solution. I don't think that we can ever get a consensus on what exactly to do with soils. Now, the second element that we stress is the participation. both because of the human rights and democratic principles behind participation, but also to get buy-in and promote implementation and enforcement of the law. Our advice is independent from any specific interest or country or government, but of course we are guided by international law, in particular human rights and environmental laws. And our assistance is tailor-made. While we collect, as you will hear, we collect a lot of national laws, we don't believe that any country's legal system can be supplanted to another. We can learn from other countries, but we cannot copy them directly. Now, the main areas of technical assistance for sustainable land management, and of course soil is very much part of that. The first one is the responsible governance of tenure. Like I mentioned, the voluntary guidelines of governance of tenure, and all the work that we've been doing in FAO for the last decade on tenure, we think it's of crucial importance for sustainability. We think that if people have secure tenure rights, they're more likely to invest in the fertility of the land, in the soil quality, in the sustainable management of the land. But we also use and work with other land management tools, for instance, on land consolidation and land banking, which we believe can be really a highly sustainable way of encouraging farmers to be more productive, feeding the world, increasing food production, but also being more environmentally sustainable. Agriculture legislation is another big area that has a huge impact on soils. Back to the argument about should there be a soil legislation, or are we bound to have a number of different laws that are relevant? For instance, legislation of pesticides tends to be their own field, but it's highly important for soil pollution. Legislation of fertilizers also, and generally on good production practices, is very important for maintenance of soil. But also the biodiversity and environmental protection laws, and I will mention the One Health questions, and in particular the antimicrobial resistance issues. These are also very important for soils. Overload of antibiotics is harming the bacteria in the soil, and therefore it's a very important issue to be worked on also from the perspective of soils, even if in practice the AMR regulations tend to be in veterinary legislation. Now, of course, forestry laws and especially the laws on how you can convert forest to agriculture, but also how you can convert agricultural land to other uses is really important. And this is something that many countries have been consistently failing to do adequately for the longest time. And finally, I just want to mention the shelter belt management, going to something that's quite narrow, quite small as an area, but can be a source of interesting legal considerations. Who should look after the shelter belt? Who should own it? Should it be an obligation of the landowner of the field to look after the shelter belt? Should it be the community, the state even? Many interesting questions that the countries are finding different solutions to. Now, I just want to show you a few publications that we have recently issued just last year or recent years on issues related to what I've been saying. So the big study on sustainability contains a big land chapter, including a section on soils. The legal guide on land consolidation is a really step-by-step guide on how to do such legislation built on experience in Eastern Europe. And the responsible governance of tenure on the law is one of our flagship publications linked to the voluntary guidelines of governance of tenure. But we are also we're continuing to work. So we will be publishing soon a study on tenure obligations and responsibilities, which is the flip side of having rights, are the obligations and responsibilities as recognized also in the voluntary guidelines. So we're looking more into that. We're looking into land abandonment and its reasons and what law can do to help on that. Again, based in Eastern Europe, where it is a really big issue with up to 30% of land being abandoned and fields left to go to weed and to bush, which is not necessarily very sustainable either in some countries. And we're looking specifically at the sustainable land management and the law. And there again, we are finding what has been mentioned before, the whole mosaic of legislation. And we are trying to get to grips with that and then focus on the two important issues that are very high in my mind at all times. One is the enforcement. We have seen too many laws that are adopted and they look very nice, but they're not enforced, they're not implemented. Nothing happens despite having the laws, and people get away with not fulfilling the obligations under the law, for instance, on soil management. On the other hand, such laws can and have been used to penalize peasants, to oppress people, to get people, especially the poor, off their lands, to make space for other and richer occupants in the hope perhaps of national development and better incomes. And this is a huge issue as well. How do you strike that balance between enforcement and penalizing poverty? Now, as I mentioned, as other people mentioned, we are really talking about the network of legislation rather than a single law in most cases, possible exception for a specific law on soils. But as we heard in the last presentation, that really is a huge area also and can link to so many different areas that it may not be advisable to have in a single law everything from human rights to fertilizer use, to go from the very broad to the very narrow. Now I want to move on very briefly to introducing SoiLEX, which has been running now for 25 years. We now have already almost 200,000 legal and policy texts inserted in this massive database that is run in collaboration with IUCN and UN Environment, UNEP, under the name of ECOLEX, and SoiLEX looks after all the legislation that is part of this. All the countries in the world, 12 subject areas that include areas that are not directly FAO related, such as mining and also climate change. And this has now become something that is getting very unwieldy. The information overload that comes from having potentially 1,000 or 2,000 returns if you want to look up a legislation in a particular country on a particular issue and how to wade through that is the reason why we are looking at these thematic collections now, that we are trying to do some analysis and structure the data in a way that is more user-friendly and more accessible. And of course, hopefully with more IT, with better technology to manage data, we hope that this will become increasingly automated. So one of the subsets is on soils, and we'll be hearing more about that in the following on SoiLEX. So this, just to conclude, this helps us find what is relevant when we're looking for information in SoiLEX. It provides some conceptual models, and it's much more user-friendly than the traditional SoiLEX database returns from our searches. And with that, I thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to participating in the discussions.
Thank you very much, Margaret. This was very insightful because you are bringing the soils into the different other elements that our legal department in FAO is working with. Clearly, and that was recognized by many participants, the issue of land tenure is fundamental, because if we are talking about soil conservation protection, we as soil scientists have experienced that if the tenure is not secure, not even the users want to invest 1 cent in doing anything for their soils because they know that they are not the owners of that plot. So very important. Thank you for this. And now I will invite to the last speakers, who's my colleague Hugo Burgis, who will be presenting and launching the SoiLEX, the tool that was mentioned before. So Hugo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ronald. So let me share my screen with everyone. So yes, my presentation will focus on the Global Soil Partnership's efforts to promote soil governance from the global to the national level. So as mentioned before by the other panelists, the notion of governance goes beyond the legal and policy realm and encompasses notions such as awareness raising, soil data and information, and also the power dynamics between the actors. So it's reflected in FAO's definition of governance, which is defined by the processes through which the public and private sectors articulate their interests, frame and prioritize issues, and manage, implement, monitor, and enforce decisions. So as part of FAO's efforts to promote sustainable agriculture, and in the absence of a formal mechanism advocating for sustainable soil management, the GSP was established back in 2012. And it aims to create and develop a strong interactive partnerships to position soil in the global agenda and to promote sustainable soil management through collective action to guarantee healthy soils across the world. So the GSP covers numerous aspects of soil governance that were also mentioned by Harold in Harold's presentation previously, such as strengthening policy and legal framework, raising awareness, facilitating the implementation of the legal frameworks with reliable scientific data, promoting capacity development, and supporting multi-stakeholders platforms. So as part of the GSP's effort, it was canalized through the production of normative documents, such as the revised World Soil Charter back in 2015, and then the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management in 2017, and more recently with the Code of Conduct for the sustainable use and management of fertilizers. So the World Soil Charter was first adopted in 1981, but had to be updated according to the new reality. And so it presents and aims to promote soil protection and sustainable soil management. And it was endorsed by all FAO members back in 2015. It presented also 4 barriers that were identified to sustainable soil conservation, which were the lack of fundings, the lack of awareness, the absence of inadequate policies on soil protection, and the absence of monitoring system to evaluate the impact of policies regarding soil protection. The lack of short-term benefits were also presented as an issue because, as Eduardo was mentioning at the very beginning, soil degradation and soil restoration is a long-term process. And so you see the benefits of soil restoration on the long term, which is an issue in regard to short-term benefits usually required for the policy realm. These principles of the revised World Soil Charter were then transformed into concrete actions to prevent, control, and minimize the 10 soil threats that Dr. Irene Euser also presented previously. And so these are presented in the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management. As Irene also mentioned previously, the importance of awareness raising is very crucial. So the establishment of the UN World Soil Day back, which is held annually on the 5th of December, generates a lot of interest and a growing interest by the public, as we can see by the number of events that keep going up every single year. So for example, in 2019, more than 650 million people were reached on that day. The importance of soil data and information was also mentioned previously in previous presentations to allow to understand the status of soil and monitor its changes. Indeed, by improving our knowledge of soil, we can then strengthen the response to preserve them. The creation of non-binding documents and technical guidelines also support soil governance and can be then easily translated into effective action through the development of regulations, awareness raising programs, and soil monitoring system. More recently, for example, the fertilizer code that the GSP produced can provide concrete action to all stakeholders related to fertilizers. Now, in regard to soil legislation and more in depth with what the SoiLEX is intended to make, as presented by Ms. Dr. Margaret Vidar, it's true that FAO-LEX and ECOLEX, because of the wide variety of topics they address, soil legislation is often hard and difficult to find because it's such a cross-cutting nature that it can be related to mining legislation, environmental legislation, agricultural legislation, urban legislation, industry legislation. So it's the idea behind the SoiLEX that we will present afterwards is basically how to facilitate the search and how to know which documents are the most important ones regarding soil legislation. So SoiLEX, as mentioned by previous presentations, is a global database on national legislation on soil protection, conservation, and restoration. So it has 4 final objectives, which are support the development of adequate soil legislation, enhance the capacity of authorities and other stakeholders in soil legislation, develop new knowledge and document good practices, and also empower civil society and everyone by giving them access to these documents. So at the SoiLEX website, which is now available on FAO Soils portal, as you can see through my colleague, Natalia Rodriguez-Gino in the chat, features 14 keywords related to soil protection. So the 10 soil threats that were presented by Dr. Irene Uzar, soil conservation, soil restoration, soil quality, and soil monitoring. So all these keywords help to select the legislations, and more than 1,745 documents from 175 countries are now currently present on the platform. So users will find a catalog of national legal instruments under each of those keywords, and the ranking of those keywords has also been improved. So notions such as which one are the most important one and relevant to the keyword has been included, as well as notion of the scope. So if it's a national, regional, or local legislation, as well as if it's binding or non-binding documents. This will help provide a central source of information and contribute to research and comparative analysis. The legal instruments can also be searched by country, thereby facilitating the understanding of national legal frameworks related to soil protection. The SoiLEX database will also serve as a catalyst for future research and cooperation on soil legislation and help identify the main gaps, and also help improve and identify, replicate successful experiences based on what is available on SoiLEX. This platform has been a collaborative approach with all the GSP focal points and national experts in the country to validate all the information that we collected from FAO-LEX and the EU Soil Wiki, which was an exercise conducted by the European Union 5 years ago, if I recall properly. The SoiLEX questionnaires were then, we received 82 responses from the national level, and more than 1,100 documents have been validated by national experts to be relevant and up to date. Paired with that, we nearly received 300 new legal instruments that were then added to the SoiLEX platform and also shared with the FAO legal team to be added on their platform, FAO-LEX. Now the way forward is to update the SoiLEX database based on the national responses, so we have the most accurate and up-to-date as possible platform to reflect the legal frameworks of each country and carry out thematic and country studies on specific aspects of soil legislation. So I strongly encourage everyone to have a look at SoiLEX, have a look at your country, and if you have any questions or if you want any addition based on your knowledge of soil legislation, then I strongly encourage you to send an email that is also available on SoiLEX and respond to the questionnaires that are also available there. So thank you very much for your time, and Ronald, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hugo, and really congratulations to you and all the team and participants from the different countries who have been contributing to SoiLEX. please share the link of SoiLEX in the chat so that colleagues and participants can access SoiLEX and start using it, because we believe it is very important. And just to tell you that I think in 2014 or 16, I don't remember now, time passed so fast, we organized a workshop in all Latin America regarding soil legal frameworks. And out of all countries in Latin America, only one country has a very specific soil law. The rest, where soil is included in different laws, given the cross-cutting issue of or the dimension of soils. But just to tell you that as an example. Now, based on all this, I would like to invite participants to respond to a poll again, 2 polls. I know time is a constraint. Very sorry for not respecting the time, but I think the topic was very nice. And I think you still are very interested because we still have 500 people. So can you please tell us, what do you think your country, if your country is properly addressing soil governance? Can you please tell us this? Based on all what you say in terms of concepts, definition, experiences, etc. Okay, participants keep responding. Let's see once we reach 60% so that we can move to the next question. Okay, so our participants are telling us, in 75% of them tell us that they don't think their country is properly addressing soil governance. So it is a very important message in terms of the way forward. So we need to work on this topic and support all countries on this. Next poll, please. The next question is, does your country have a specific soil law that constitutes the framework for developing policies and actions towards sustainable soil management? I gave you an example from Latin America, but maybe you can tell us more. We got requests to support some countries to develop, for instance, the national soil legislation. And as we heard, it is not that we can copy and paste from another country. Every country, every type of soil, etc., and the context is very specific. So that requires a very specific analysis. Okay, as you can see, from 72% of our participants, 65% said that they don't have a specific law in soil law in their country. So that's very important to know, and I think that will be the basis for the final part, which is I would like to ask all the panel, all the presenters to give us a take-home message based on the following. I have been reading the questions that were coming through the chat, and there were, for instance, someone saying, in my country, I will not specify, we have soil law and we had many different laws addressing soils. However, soil degradation continues to be a problem. Is a soil law guaranteeing that we will have enough actions to protect really our soils? That was one of the questions. In the other side, they said that they think that soil governance is not really a field that has been being addressed at national level, especially, and they want to know how the global level, in terms of international institutions, organizations, our efforts can help them or help the politicians to take actions in terms of having soil governance at national level. So those are the two angles that I'm putting, and I would like all the presenters to give us a take-home message based on them. So I will start with ladies first. So Irene, you have the floor. Please be brief.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you also for all these interesting comments. It would be really interesting to go back and forth and discuss all the cases. My main message would be that we have to act on all levels. I mean, it's obvious that these levels are always matching, and if it's a good soil governance, then it will work together. And of course, it's a matter of political will. So concerning the international level, I mean, international law always, as you might know, is about the states' obligations of states to do something. And on national level, it might also include obligations of a person to protect the soil in their property, for example, or the tenure or so. So it depends on which level of action fits into each other. And I mean, there are different types of legal instruments for different cases of soil threat, or different also ecological position, climately related, different soil types all over the world. And so you really have to find a tailor-made soil law that fits to the purposes. And we can learn from each other to find good possibilities to protect the soils. But what is needed foremost is that there will be a kind of a political will expressed with all of our support. I mean, our society and all of us are requested to act and to express this will to change something, also in the legal sense. So this would be my hope for this year, that we all work together and make something out of it.
Thank you very much. This is very well noted. Margaret?
Thank you. In 2019, FAO calculated about 690 million people still were food insecure and did not have access to enough food. And this number has only gone up because of COVID. Another 150, almost 200 million more have been added to this number now. And I think despite this, we have been fighting now for a very long time to build up the political will to address hunger. It has been very slow. And one of the things that we are trying now, and has been working in some regions, like in Latin America, is to really engage parliamentarians. And one of the messages to parliamentarians could be around soils, because if we lose the soils, then we will also lose the food, and therefore we'll have even more hunger. So I think that could be one of the take-home messages in terms of continued advocacy for the environment and linking it back to food security. Thank you, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Professor Ruppel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, from my side, a lot has been said, but I think that what needs to be done is to securitize the element of soil, in a sense that we have experienced it in the context of water, in a sense that we have experienced it from the UN Security Council in the context of climate, because soil is a common good. It makes it complicated because it's so complex, and soil is detached from ownership. It's detached from possession. It's a legal niche And there are so many offenses involved towards the different role players that I think the only way we can deal with this complexity, because we will not immediately at least change ownership patterns. They have been in existence for time immemorial, for thousands of years. And if you touch that iron, you will see that it is very hot. But if you address this in the context of soil security, I think a lot can be done, because it is human security if we talk soil security. That is environmental security, that is economic security. It is the freedom from need and the freedom from want. And I think if we address that, and a circle like this one, or universities, in the context of academic diplomacy, we can push the agenda. And I would like to really congratulate you for organizing this event today. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Ruppel. Indeed, when we will be forwarding you the questions, there was one regarding of what is the role of universities in terms of soil governance. So you address it very well now. Thanks a lot. Harald, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would first like to express that to my perception, there is a strong political will to address soil issues now. I have never seen a discussion on improved soil governance as we have it right now in Germany. There's a really ongoing process to address sustainable soil management, which we haven't seen before. So there's a strong political will to do that. And I think I would like to encourage everybody to work on this process. From a more technical point of view, from a legal perspective, I would like to say the main barriers to good soil governance is weak implementation, weak enforcement. Often we have a lot of good provisions on the paper, but they are not implemented. So we need to discuss how we can improve the implementation. First point. Second point, in several countries, or many, land is regarded as a private asset, where state is not allowed to interfere and to set requirements. So we need to overcome this legal perception. That's the second point. And the third point, I made it already in my presentations, we need scientific standards. We have those in Germany for contamination, but we don't have it, for example, for compaction, we don't have it for salinization, and we don't have it for loss of carbon. And without these scientific standards, we cannot come to a real good soil governance on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harald. Very well noted. Hugo?
Yes, I think Harold said it perfectly. Having the soil legislation on soil protection is one thing, but the implementation is another one. And I think implementation is related to scientific data and information, so we can then monitor the impact of these laws and regulations and see if there is concrete protection or not. In regard to your question regarding political will, I think it's everyone. If we all push towards soil protection, if we all ask our politicians to push forward soil protection, I think it's definitely something that is then moving forward. I think, as Harold was saying, there's a lot of discussions related to environment, and I think soil is having really a momentum right now. So I think we can definitely push forward in the political realm and then towards the legal realm.
Thank you very much, Hugo, and thank you very much all our presenters. I think, and as you can see, the appreciation from all participants, this has been a very informative webinar. A lot has been said from different perspectives, new elements, new information, because many people were not aware about soil governance or soil legislation, and now they are realizing the importance of it. I will conclude the webinar by bringing some messages out of all what has been said. First of all, there has not been before a better momentum for soils than now. I can tell you, and that's from the experience that we are having in FAO, which is not a convention, but is a UN organization where we deal with ministries of agriculture or food security, if there are some. But I can tell you, when we started in 2010, it was really very difficult because soil is not like water, very easily to sell. Soil requires a lot of work, although everybody said that they love their soil. That love is too much because they are not really doing much, really. And this is changing. This has been changing, and awareness raising is crucial, and we should keep that, because not only with the general public, but with decision makers. And every time there is more pressure from general public, UN the NGOs, movements, etc., asking for healthy soils. So this will continue, and new doors are being opened, like climate change, biodiversity, where soils can play a role. So every time we are getting more and more demands, and that is putting more pressure on trying to see how we can really promote sustainable soil management, and countries do policies, legislation, etc., in order to protect this resource. So I believe this is the time, and this is the time in which we need to try to fill these gaps by proposing tools that will allow all the decision makers to have either binding, which is the best, of course, but even non-binding, that will put more pressure on them. But I'm sure that sooner than later, we will be having soils at the level with the attention they deserve. But this will not be done if we don't work at all levels. And national levels are fundamental. And it was clearly said, some countries have laws, but the laws are there only. Nobody's implementing. So we need to see ways in which we need to pressure for implementation, because that's crucial. Otherwise, how we can do it? Definitely, we would like to continue with this work. And that's why I want to thank, for instance, our GSP working group on soil legislation that was just started. And I hope we will count with all the great speakers we have, and also the participants, in order to start working harder in this topic, because we believe it is crucial. We can only start having support at the high level by having frameworks, by having legal instruments, by having instruments that will allow us to have investment at national level, institutions who can dedicate to research and science on soils, because currently that's missing in many countries. And they say we cannot invest because we don't have any legislation that support this. You see, the answer is clear. So there is momentum, there is a lot of work to be done, and this will happen only with all of you. So we hope this is just the beginning, and we count with all of you to continue. Thank you very much again, and we wish you a very good, healthy 2021. You will be hearing from us soon. Thanks a lot to our speakers again and our participants, and apologies for the delay, but there was too much interest. Thanks a lot, and have a nice day or evening.
Thank you very much. Bye.